A gang cornered a pharma heir in a downtown alley, but his Uber driver revealed a hidden skill that would save his life and shatter the walls around both their hearts. She didn't know that 60 seconds of violence would unravel 5 years of running from who she used to be, or that saving him would force her to choose between the invisibility that kept her safe and the connection she'd sworn never to risk again. 2 fractured souls, 1 brutal night, and a moment that would prove some people are warriors no matter what they're wearing. Before we dive into this story of hidden identities and the courage to step back into danger for someone who needs you, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. We love seeing how far these stories of everyday heroes reach. And if you believe that the people we overlook are often the ones with the most to give, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Earlier that evening, Damien Castellano had been trapped in yet another charity gala at the Meridian Hotel, drowning in champagne flutes and carefully practiced condolences. Just another Thursday night for a man whose billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire couldn't save the one person who mattered most. He stood near the marble fountain in the grand ballroom, nodding politely as another board member's wife touched his arm with practiced sympathy. Sophia would be so proud of the work you're doing, Damien. The new oncology research wing is a beautiful tribute. He smiled. It was the smile he'd perfected over 4 years of widowhood, warm enough to seem genuine, distant enough to prevent follow-up questions. Thank you, Margaret. That's very kind. But inside, the walls were closing in. The crystal chandeliers felt too bright, the string quartet too loud, the air too thick with expensive perfume and pity. He needed to leave. Damien excused himself with a polite lie about an early morning board meeting, slipped through the kitchen exit, and found himself on the rain-slicked street behind the hotel. The March air was sharp and cold, carrying the metallic scent of coming storm. He pulled out his phone and opened the Uber app. 3 minutes away. Black Honda Civic. Driver, Ivy. 4. 97 stars. Good enough. The rain started falling in earnest as he waited, fat droplets that darkened the shoulders of his Tom Ford suit. He didn't bother taking shelter under the hotel awning. The rain felt honest, real. Unlike everything inside that ballroom. Headlights cut through the downpour. The Honda pulled up, and Damien climbed into the back seat without ceremony, bringing the smell of rain and expensive cologne into the small space. "Good evening," a woman's voice said from the front. Soft, careful. The voice of someone who'd learned not to intrude. Damien glanced up briefly, blonde hair pulled back in a low ponytail. Blue eyes that met his in the rearview mirror for exactly 1 second before looking away. Pretty, in an understated way that suggested she worked hard to be invisible. "Evening," he replied, already pulling out his phone. "The address is in the app." "Yes, sir. I see it. 42 minutes with current traffic." He nodded, fingers already moving across his screen, responding to emails that couldn't wait, even though it was nearly 11 p.m. The quarterly earnings report. The FDA approval that was taking too long. The reminder from his assistant that Sophie's kindergarten parent-teacher conference was tomorrow. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Never enough hours in today. They drove in silence through the financial district, traffic lights painting streaks of red and green across the wet windshield. Damien barely noticed when they turned onto Riverside Avenue, barely registered the shift from bright downtown corridors to the dimmer industrial stretch near the waterfront. But Ivy noticed. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. Her eyes, those careful, quiet eyes, began checking mirrors more frequently, scanning shadows, calculating distances. She'd driven this route before, knew it was faster than taking the highway at this hour. But something felt wrong tonight. The way those 3 men stood on the corner near the abandoned textile factory. The way they turned to watch as her car passed. The way one of them lifted something to his mouth, a radio maybe, and spoke into it. 5 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her instincts. They'd just learned to whisper instead of scream. "Sir?" Her voice was still soft, but there was something underneath it now, something that made Damien look up from his phone. "Would you mind if I took the next right? Traffic app is showing an accident ahead." It was a lie, a calculated one, but he didn't need to know that. "Whatever's fastest," Damien said, already looking back down. Ivy turned right onto Marlowe Street. Narrower, darker, Warehouse loading docks on both sides. Streetlights spaced too far apart. The rain was heavier here, drumming on the roof like fingernails. She was 3 blocks down when she saw them. 3 men stepping into the street directly ahead, not moving aside, not running, just standing there in the rain, faces partially hidden by hoods, hands in pockets. Ivy's heart rate didn't spike. It settled, dropped into the steady rhythm she remembered from a different life. Her breathing slowed, her vision sharpened. She stopped the car 20 feet from the men. "What's going on?" Damien asked, finally putting his phone down. He leaned forward, trying to see through the rain-streaked windshield. "Stay in the car," Ivy said quietly. "Lock the doors after I get out." "What? Why would you—" But the men were already moving. The tallest one came directly to Damien's window. The other 2 flanked the car on either side, and the tall one wasn't empty-handed anymore. The gun appeared so casually, pulled from his jacket like it was nothing more than a wallet. He tapped it against Damien's window. Once, twice. "Damien Castellano," the man said, voice muffled through glass and rain but still perfectly clear. "Get out of the car. We need to have a conversation about what your company did to my brother." Damien's face went white. His hand moved instinctively toward his phone, but another tap of the gun, harder this time, stopped him. "Don't," the man said. "Just step out. Nobody else needs to get hurt tonight." Ivy was already moving. She'd spent 5 years driving strangers through city streets, collecting 5-star ratings and polite tips, keeping her head down and her past buried. 5 years telling herself she wasn't that person anymore. Wasn't the woman who'd led tactical units through hostile territory. Wasn't the soldier who'd been trained in 17 different ways to disarm, disable, and neutralize threats. She was just Ivy Brennan, Uber driver, invisible, safe. But invisibility only works until someone you're protecting is in danger. She opened her door. The rain hit her immediately, cold and sharp, soaking through her plain gray hoodie in seconds. She stepped out slowly, hands visible, movements non-threatening. "Ma'am, get back in the car," the tall man said, not even looking at her. His attention was still on Damien. "This doesn't concern you." "He's my passenger," Ivy said quietly. Her voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone stating simple facts. "You want him? You go through me." Now the man looked at her, really looked, saw a woman in her 30s wearing a damp hoodie and jeans, blonde hair plastered to her face, probably 5'7" at most. He almost smiled. "Lady, I don't want to hurt you, but if you don't get back in that car in the next 5 seconds, I will." Ivy didn't move. Her eyes tracked all 3 men simultaneously, a skill that took years to develop, that she'd thought she'd never need again. The tall one with the gun, the stocky one on the left with his hand inside his jacket, the thin one on the right bouncing on his toes, nervous, probably new to this. 3 targets, 3 angles, 6 seconds if she moved fast, 8 if she played it safe. She chose fast. "Last chance," the tall man said, raising the gun toward her now instead of Damien. Ivy's body remembered before her mind even gave permission. She moved, 3 steps forward, faster than he could process. Her left hand swept up and caught his wrist, pushing the gun skyward just as his finger twitched on the trigger. The shot went wild, cracking through the rain and echoing off warehouse walls. Her right elbow drove into his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping, and she twisted the gun from his grip with a movement so fluid it looked like sleight of hand. 2 seconds. 1 down. The stocky man was pulling his own weapon, a knife, not a gun, when Ivy spun and caught his arm mid-draw. She used his forward momentum against him, stepping aside and guiding him face first into the Honda's hood with a metallic thud. He went limp. 4 seconds. 2 down. The thin one was backing away now, hands up, eyes wide with sudden understanding that this wasn't a random Uber driver, wasn't a civilian at all. "Go," Ivy said quietly. Still that same soft voice, but underneath it now, unmistakable, command, authority, the voice of someone who'd led soldiers into combat. "Tell whoever sent you that they picked the wrong car." He went, sprinting into the rain, disappearing between warehouses without looking back. 6 seconds, 3 neutralized. Ivy stood there for a moment, breathing steadily, rain streaming down her face. The gun hung loose in her right hand. Cleared, safety on, finger nowhere near the trigger. Professional, automatic. Then she looked at the Honda's back window. Damien Castellano stared back at her through the rain-streaked glass, his face a mixture of shock and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, though they'd never met before tonight. He'd watched the whole thing. Watched his invisible Uber driver transform into something entirely different. Watched her move with precision that spoke of years of training. Watched her save his life without hesitation, without dramatics, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ivy walked back to the driver's door, still holding the gun carefully. She knocked on Damien's window with her free hand. "It's safe now," she said. "But we should go. They might come back." Damien unlocked the door with shaking fingers. Ivy slid into the driver's seat, water dripping from her hair onto the floor mat. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911 with one hand while starting the car with the other. "Yes, this is Ivy Brennan. I need to report an attempted armed robbery and assault at the corner of Marlowe and 3rd. 3 perpetrators, 2 incapacitated, 1 fled on foot. The intended victim is safe. We're leaving the scene now but will be available for statements." A pause. "Badge number?" "I don't have one anymore. Former Sergeant Brennan, U.S. Army. Honorably discharged. My current location is..." She rattled off details with military efficiency, then hung up. The car was already moving, pulling away from the 2 men still groaning on the wet pavement, turning back toward brighter streets where police sirens were beginning to wail in the distance. Damien finally found his voice. "Who are you?" Ivy glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Those blue eyes that had seemed so careful, so deliberately unremarkable, now held something different, something sharp, alert. The eyes of someone who assessed threats and calculated responses before most people even registered danger. "Your Uber driver," she said simply. "Like the app said, Uber drivers don't do that." He gestured vaguely toward where they'd been, where his life had almost ended, where hers had just crashed back into the person she'd spent 5 years running from. Ivy was quiet for a moment. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm. Left, right, normal, mundane. As if the last 6 seconds hadn't just shattered her carefully constructed invisibility into 1,000 irretrievable pieces. "Most Uber drivers weren't Army," she said finally. "Most Uber drivers didn't spend 8 years learning how to keep people alive in places where everything wants them dead. Most Uber drivers," Damien said quietly, his shock fading into something that sounded almost like wonder, "don't save lives in their spare time." Ivy didn't respond, just kept driving toward the address in the app, toward his mansion in Brookhaven Heights, toward the moment when he'd get out, leave a generous tip, probably 5 stars, and she'd go back to being invisible. Except she wouldn't. Not anymore. Because Damien Castellano was already looking at her differently, was already seeing her. And for someone who'd spent 5 years perfecting the art of not being seen, that was the most dangerous thing of all. The police station was fluorescent bright and sterile, smelling of burned coffee and bureaucracy. Ivy sat in a plastic chair that had been bolted to the floor, answering the same questions for the 3rd time, while Damien paced near the vending machines, his Tom Ford suit rumpled and damp, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Detective Martinez looked up from her notepad. "And you're certain you didn't know the assailants prior to tonight?" "Certain," Ivy said. Her voice was flat, professional. The voice she'd used in debriefings back when her opinions had mattered to people who made life-and-death decisions. "I'd never seen any of them before. But you recognized the threat pattern. I drive these streets every night. I know what normal looks like. That wasn't normal." Martinez studied her for a long moment. "Former Army, you said. What was your specialty?" Ivy hesitated. This was always where it got complicated, where people's expressions changed from curiosity to something else. Wariness. Sometimes fear. Close quarters combat instructor, tactical threat assessment, personal security detail for high-value targets in hostile zones. High-value targets. Martinez wrote something down. "Like Mr. Castellano. I didn't know who he was until he got in my car. But you protected him anyway. Put yourself between 3 armed men and a stranger." Ivy met the detective's eyes. "That's what we do, isn't it? Protect people, whether we know them or not." Martinez smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was respectful. Most people run toward safety, Ms. Brennan. You ran toward danger. That takes a particular kind of person. Or a particular kind of broken, Ivy said quietly. The detective's expression softened. She closed her notepad. You're free to go. We'll need you to come back tomorrow for a formal statement. But for tonight, you've given us everything we need. The 2 men you incapacitated are in custody. The 3rd one we'll find. She paused. What you did tonight, that was good work. Clean. Controlled. You probably saved Mr. Castellano's life. Ivy stood. Her knees were steadier than they'd been an hour ago, but her hands still trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. Adrenaline withdrawal. She remembered this feeling, hated this feeling. I just did what anyone would do, she said. No, Martinez replied. You did what almost no one could do. There's a difference. Damien was waiting by the precinct doors when Ivy walked out. He'd been on his phone for the last 20 minutes, his voice low and urgent, but he ended the call the moment he saw her. They're letting you go? He asked. For tonight. I have to come back tomorrow. He nodded, ran a hand through his damp hair. He looked exhausted, shaken in a way that expensive suits and corner offices couldn't hide. I called my attorney, he said. Daniel Rothstein, best criminal defense lawyer in the state. He'll meet you tomorrow. Make sure you're not charged with anything. Self-defense is clear-cut here, but I want to be certain you're protected. Ivy blinked. That's not necessary. It's already done. His tone was gentle but absolute. The voice of a man accustomed to solving problems with resources most people couldn't imagine. You saved my life. The least I can do is make sure yours isn't complicated by what happened tonight. They stood there in the fluorescent spill of light from the precinct entrance. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and shining, reflecting red and blue lights from the patrol cars parked along the curb. How are you getting home? Damien asked. Bus, then the subway. It's fine. It's 2 a.m. I've traveled through worse at worse hours. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Ivy felt something uncomfortable twist in her chest. She wasn't used to being seen. 5 years of invisibility, and now this man with his expensive watch and his careful eyes was peeling back layers she'd worked so hard to construct. Let me drive you, he said. You don't know where I live. Then tell me. Ivy almost said no. Should have said no. Should have walked away, taken the bus, disappeared back into the anonymous current of the city where she belonged. But something in his expression stopped her. Not pity, not obligation, something else. Gratitude, and beneath it, curiosity. The look of someone who'd just discovered that the world contained mysteries he hadn't known existed. Grant Street, she said finally. The efficiency apartments near the old train depot. I know where that is. He pulled keys from his pocket. My car's in the lot. Come on. His car was a midnight blue Tesla Model S, immaculately clean despite the night's chaos. Leather seats that probably cost more than Ivy's monthly rent. A dashboard that looked like something from a spacecraft. She slid into the passenger seat and immediately felt out of place, like a stain on expensive fabric. Damien started the car. The engine was so quiet she barely heard it. They drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. The city was nearly empty at this hour. Just a few delivery trucks and the occasional taxi. Streetlights painted the interior of the car in rhythmic waves of orange and shadow. Can I ask you something? Damien said finally. You can ask. Why did you do it? Step out of the car. You could have driven away. Could have kept yourself safe. Ivy stared out the window, watched the darkened storefronts slide past. A 24-hour laundromat with its lights still on. A bodega with iron gates pulled down for the night. I don't know, she said, which was a lie. She knew exactly why. She just didn't want to explain it to a stranger. Didn't want to talk about Fallujah, about the mission that went wrong, about the 3 soldiers who died because she'd made the wrong call, about how she'd spent 5 years trying to disappear because if she wasn't there, she couldn't fail anyone ever again. But also, if she wasn't there, she couldn't save anyone either. Damien let the silence stretch. He was good at that, she realized, comfortable with quiet. Most people tried to fill it. I do know, he said eventually. Why you did it? Ivy looked at him. Because you're someone who runs toward danger instead of away from it, he continued, eyes on the road. Because when you see someone in trouble, Something inside you won't let you walk away. Even when walking away would be smarter, safer. Even when you've probably spent years trying to convince yourself that you're done being that person. Her throat tightened. You don't know me. No, but I recognize you. I see people like you sometimes, in boardrooms, at conferences, the ones who can't stop trying to save things. Companies, industries, people, even when it costs them everything. That's different. You save things with money and strategy. I saved you with violence. You saved me, he said simply. The method doesn't change the outcome. They turned onto Grant Street. The buildings here were shorter, older, some with cracked facades and faded paint. Ivy's apartment was in the middle of the block, a 3-story walk-up with a rusted fire escape clinging to the brick. Damien pulled up to the curb. Ivy reached for the door handle, but his voice stopped her. Wait! She turned back. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into invisibility, but she held his gaze. Years of military discipline wouldn't let her look away first. I want to hire you, he said. I already have a job, not as an Uber driver, as private security, for me and my daughter. The words hung in the air between them like something solid, something that could reshape the architecture of her carefully ordered life. No, Ivy said immediately. I'll pay you $8,000 a month, plus housing if you need it, health insurance, full benefits. I said no. Those men tonight, they knew who I was, knew my route, knew my schedule. That wasn't random. That was planned. His jaw tightened. I have a 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. She's with my mother tonight, but usually she's with me. If something like tonight happens again and she's in the car, then hire professional security. I'm sure you can afford the best. I watched the best in action tonight. You assessed, reacted, and neutralized 3 armed threats in less than 10 seconds. Most trained bodyguards couldn't do that. Most trained bodyguards didn't leave the military with a medical discharge for PTSD, Ivy said flatly. Is that what you want around your daughter? Someone who wakes up screaming at 3 a.m.? Someone who checks every room for exits and can't sit with her back to a door? Someone who... She stopped. She'd said too much. Revealed too much. Damien's expression didn't change. Didn't show pity or horror or any of the things she expected. My wife died 4 years ago, he said quietly. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. We had 2 months from diagnosis to the end. Sophie was 14 months old. She doesn't remember her mother. Doesn't remember the woman who carried her for 9 months, who sang to her at night, who would have done anything to stay alive for her. He turned to face Ivy fully now. I don't sleep either. I work until I'm exhausted, then I sit in Sophie's room and watch her breathe because I'm terrified that if I close my eyes, I'll wake up and she'll be gone too. I can't eat in the dining room because Sophia and I had our last real conversation there. I can't go into the library because that's where I told Sophie that Mommy wasn't coming home. Every corner of my house is haunted. His voice was steady, matter of fact. But underneath, Ivy heard the same thing she heard in her own voice when she talked about her past. The careful control. The walls built from pain and time. So if you think I'm looking for perfect, he continued, I'm not. I'm looking for someone who understands what it means to lose everything. Who understands that sometimes staying alive is its own kind of war. And who, despite all that, will still step between danger and the people who need protecting. Ivy's hands were shaking again, not from adrenaline this time, from something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope, and hope was the thing she'd learned not to trust. I don't do this anymore, she whispered. I left that life. I'm not that person. You were that person 3 hours ago in the rain. That was different. That was instinct, Damien finished. Exactly, which means it's still in you. You can't unlearn who you are, Ms. Brennan. You can only choose whether to use it or bury it. She wanted to get out of the car, wanted to run up to her apartment and lock the door and pretend this conversation never happened, wanted to wake up tomorrow and go back to being invisible. But she also wanted, God help her, she wanted to feel useful again, to protect someone who needed it, to be more than a 5-star rating and a polite goodbye. I need to think about it, she said finally. Damien reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Simple, elegant, embossed lettering. That's my direct line. When you're ready to talk, Call me. Anytime. Day or night. Ivy took the card. Her fingers brushed his for a second, and she felt the warmth of his skin, the calluses that suggested he worked with his hands sometimes, despite the executive lifestyle. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "I'm not asking for promises, just consideration." She got out of the car, stood on the rain-damp sidewalk, the card held carefully in her hand like something fragile. Damien leaned toward the open passenger door. "Miss Brennan? Ivy?" She turned back. "Thank you," he said simply. "For tonight, for my life, for—" He paused, searching for words. "For reminding me that there are still people in the world who choose courage over safety." Then he closed the door, and the Tesla pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Ivy stood there for a long time, staring at the card in her hand. $8,000 a month, housing, benefits. A reason to wake up that wasn't just about surviving another day, and a 5-year-old girl who'd lost her mother, who needed protection not just from physical threats, but from the loneliness that Ivy recognized in Damien's voice. The loneliness that matched her own. She should say no. Should throw the card away. Should go back to being invisible. But when she finally climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, she didn't throw the card away. She set it on her nightstand, right next to the medication she took for nightmares and the photograph of her unit from before everything went wrong. And when sleep finally came at 5 a.m., she dreamed not of Fallujah, but of a little girl with dark hair, asking why the pretty lady with sad eyes looked so lonely. 3 days later, Ivy made the call. Damien answered on the second ring. "This is Castellano. It's Ivy Brennan." A pause. Then, "Ms. Brennan, I'm glad you called. I have conditions. I'm listening. I'm not a live-in employee. I'll work standard hours, 8 to 6, Monday through Friday. Weekends only if there's a specific event that requires security." Agreed. "I don't do personal errands. I'm not a nanny or a housekeeper. I drive. I assess threats. I maintain security protocols. That's it." Understood. "And if at any point I feel like I'm not fit to do the job, if the PTSD becomes a liability, I walk away. No arguments. No guilt trips." There was a longer pause this time. Then Damien said, "I wouldn't want you to stay if you felt you couldn't do the work safely, but I also won't let you run just because you're scared. There's a difference between being unable and being afraid of being able." Ivy closed her eyes. He saw too much, understood too much. "When do you want me to start?" she asked. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. I'll text you the address. And Ivy?" "Yes?" "Bring an overnight bag. The apartment above the garage is empty. It's yours if you want it. No pressure. But the commute from Grant Street to Brookhaven Heights is an hour each way. This would be easier." "I said I don't do live-in. And I'm offering you a private apartment on the property, not a room in the main house. 2 different things. Think about it." He hung up before she could argue. Ivy stared at her phone for a long time. Then she started packing. The Castellano estate was everything Ivy expected and nothing she was prepared for. The main house was a sprawling Georgian colonial with white columns and ivy climbing the brick facade, manicured lawns, a circular driveway with a fountain in the center, wrought iron gates that probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years of driving. She pulled her battered Honda Civic up to the gate at 6:55 a.m., feeling acutely aware of how it looked next to the Tesla and the Range Rover and the vintage Porsche parked in the visible garage. The intercom crackled. "Ms. Brennan?" "Yes. Come on through. Mr. Castellano is expecting you." The gates swung open silently. Damien met her at the front door, dressed in charcoal slacks and a white button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked less like a pharmaceutical executive and more like someone's very attractive college professor. "You're early," he said, smiling slightly. "Military habit. Good habit. Come in." The interior of the house was elegant but warm. Hardwood floors, crown molding, artwork that looked expensive but not ostentatious, family photos on the mantel above a fireplace that actually looked used. And standing in the hallway, wearing pink pajamas with unicorns on them, was a little girl with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes the same deep brown as her father's. Sophie Castellano. She stared up at Ivy with open curiosity, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had clearly been loved nearly to death. "You're the lady who saved Daddy," she said. Ivy blinked, looked at Damien. "She asks questions," he said mildly. "I answered them honestly, age-appropriately, but honestly." Sophie stepped closer. "Were the bad men scary?" "A little," Ivy admitted. "But you stopped them anyway." "I did." "That's very brave." Sophie tilted her head. "You smell like rain and coffee. That's my favorite smell." And something inside Ivy's chest, something that had been frozen solid for 5 years, cracked open just a little bit. She knelt down to Sophie's eye level. "What's your rabbit's name?" "Mr. Hopscotch. He's very old. Mommy gave him to me, but I don't remember Mommy. Do you think that's sad?" The question was so direct, so achingly vulnerable, that Ivy forgot how to breathe for a second. "I think," she said carefully, "that your mommy would be happy you love Mr. Hopscotch so much. That's how love works. It doesn't need memory. It just needs to be felt." Sophie considered this. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Ivy's neck, the rabbit squished between them. "I think you're going to keep us safe," she whispered. Ivy's arms came up automatically, holding the child carefully, as if she might break. She looked up at Damien over Sophie's shoulder and saw something in his expression that terrified her. Recognition, understanding. The look of a man who'd just watched his daughter choose to trust someone and who was realizing he might be choosing the same thing. "Sophie, sweetheart," Damien said gently. "Ivy has work to do. Let's let her get settled, okay?" Sophie pulled back, smiling. "Okay, but Ivy, will you have breakfast with us? Daddy makes really good pancakes, but they're always burnt on one side. Maybe you can help him." Ivy started to say no, started to establish boundaries, started to remember that she was here to work, not to become part of their lives. But then Sophie grabbed her hand, small fingers wrapping around hers with complete trust, and said, "Please." "Okay," Ivy heard herself say. "I can help with pancakes." And just like that, without even realizing it, she stopped being just the hired security. She started becoming part of the family. 6 weeks passed like a dream Ivy didn't know she was allowed to have. She fell into routines she'd thought were lost to her forever. Morning coffee with Damien while Sophie ate cereal and chattered about her kindergarten class. Driving Sophie to school, watching her run toward the building with Mr. Hopscotch bouncing in her backpack. Long afternoons maintaining security protocols, running background checks on anyone who came near the estate, coordinating with Damien's corporate security team. And dinners, always dinners. At first, Ivy ate in the apartment above the garage, a space far nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived, with exposed brick and tall windows and furniture that didn't come from thrift stores. But Sophie had other ideas. "You can't eat alone," the little girl had declared on the 4th night, standing in the doorway of the garage apartment with her hands on her hips. "That's too sad. You have to eat with us." "Sophie, Ivy might want her privacy," Damien had said, but his eyes had asked a different question. And Ivy, who'd spent 5 years eating alone, who'd convinced herself that isolation was safety, found herself saying yes. So now they ate together, the 3 of them around the kitchen table, not the formal dining room that Damien still couldn't enter without seeing ghosts. Sophie between them, telling elaborate stories about playground politics and classroom drama. Damien asking questions that made his daughter giggle. Ivy watching them both and feeling something dangerous take root in her chest. Belonging. She learned things about them. Small things. Important things. That Damien took his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar cube, never 2. That he worked too much but always came home by 6 for Sophie. That he kept a photo of his late wife in his office, but had removed the ones from the rest of the house because Sophie asked too many questions about the mother she couldn't remember. That Sophie slept with 17 stuffed animals, but Mr. Hopscotch was always closest to her face. That she was terrified of thunderstorms but pretended not to be. That she'd started drawing pictures of her family, stick figures labeled Daddy, Sophie, and Ivy in careful kindergarten letters. That Damien watched Ivy sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. Watched her with an expression she couldn't quite name, something that was part gratitude, part curiosity, and part something else entirely, something that made her want to run and stay in equal measure. She was falling into their lives, letting them fall into hers. And that's when Victoria Castellano arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, unexpectedly early. Ivy was in the kitchen making Sophie's lunch when she heard the doorbell ring, followed by the click of expensive heels on hardwood. "Damien?" A woman's voice. Cultured, sharp. "Where are you?" Ivy stepped into the hallway just as an elegant woman in her mid-60s swept through the foyer like she owned it, probably because she used to. Silver hair cut in a perfect bob, a Chanel suit that probably cost more than Ivy's Honda. Eyes the same deep brown as Damien's and Sophie's, but colder, calculating. Victoria Castellano stopped when she saw Ivy. Her gaze traveled from Ivy's ponytail to her simple jeans and t-shirt to her worn sneakers. Assessing, judging. "And you are?" "Ivy Brennan. I work for your son." "Work." Victoria said the word like it tasted suspicious. "In what capacity?" "Security and driving." "How?" "Practical." The smile didn't reach Victoria's eyes. "And where is my son?" "Upstairs getting Sophie ready for school." "I see. And you're making?" "Sandwiches." Victoria glanced at the kitchen counter where Ivy had been cutting crusts off bread, the way Sophie liked it. How domestic. Before Ivy could respond, Damien appeared at the top of the stairs with Sophie holding his hand. "Mother?" His tone was carefully neutral. "I didn't know you were coming. I called yesterday. You didn't answer, so I decided to visit." Victoria's attention shifted to Sophie, and her expression softened slightly. "Hello, darling. Come give grandmother a hug." Sophie hesitated, then walked down the stairs and accepted a brief, perfunctory embrace. "You're getting so big," Victoria said. "Soon you won't need all these helpers." Her gaze flicked to Ivy again. "Ivy's not a helper," Sophie said seriously. "She's family." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Victoria's smile became brittle. "Darling Ms. Brennan works for your father. That's different from family. But she eats dinner with us every night, and she reads me stories, and she knows all my stuffed animals' names. That's what family does." "Sophie, go finish getting ready for school," Damien said gently. "I need to talk to grandmother for a minute." Sophie glanced between the adults, her 5-year-old intuition sensing tension. Then she looked at Ivy. "You're still taking me to school, right?" "Of course," Ivy said softly. "Okay, good." Sophie ran back upstairs. The moment she was out of earshot, Victoria turned to her son. "Can we speak privately? Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Ivy." "I don't think that's wise." Nevertheless, Victoria's jaw tightened. Then she turned to Ivy with a smile that was all edges. "Fine. Ms. Brennan, how long have you been working for my son?" 6 weeks. "And in those 6 weeks, you've become quite integrated into the household. Interesting how quickly that happened." "Mother," Damien warned. But Victoria continued, her voice pleasant and poisonous. "I'm simply curious about the woman who's inserted herself into my granddaughter's life so thoroughly. What did you do before this, Ms. Brennan? Before you were making sandwiches and reading bedtime stories?" "I was a soldier." "A soldier," Victoria repeated the word thoughtfully. "And now you're here, living above my son's garage, eating at his table, playing house with his daughter. Tell me, what exactly are your intentions?" "I don't have intentions. I have a job. A job that pays how much? $8,000 a month? For driving and sandwich making?" Forgive me if I find that arrangement rather generous, almost suspiciously so. "That's enough." Damien's voice was quiet, but absolute. "Ivy saved my life. She protects Sophie. She's earned every dollar I pay her and more." "I'm sure she has," Victoria said smoothly. "I'm simply concerned about Sophie's well-being. Children form attachments, Damien, particularly children who've already lost their mother. What happens when Ms. Brennan decides this job isn't for her anymore? When she leaves, Sophie will be devastated." "I'm not going anywhere," Ivy said before she could stop herself. Victoria raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "No? How remarkably certain you are. Most employees don't make such permanent declarations after 6 weeks. And there it was, the implication hanging in the air like smoke, that Ivy was more than an employee, that this was more than a job, that Victoria Castellano had looked at the three of them, at the dinners and the routines and the way Sophie called Ivy family, and had seen exactly what Ivy had been trying so hard not to see herself. "I think it's time for you to go, Mother," Damien said. "I'm only trying to protect you, both of you." Victoria picked up her purse. I'll have my attorney look into Ms. Brennan's background. Make sure there's nothing concerning. You understand, I'm sure. I understand that you're overstepping. I'm being a mother and a grandmother. Someone has to think about potential consequences. She walked toward the door, then paused. By the way, Damien, I had lunch with Rebecca Morse yesterday. Sophia's college roommate. Remember her? She's widowed now, too. She asked about you. I gave her your number. I think you two should reconnect. She's appropriate, stable, from a good family. The message was clear. Not like the damaged soldier currently standing in your kitchen. Victoria left. The silence she left behind was suffocating. Ivy stood frozen in the hallway, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel Damien looking at her, could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her chest. Ivy, I should take Sophie to school, she said quietly. She'll be late. Ivy, don't let her get in your head. She doesn't speak for me. Doesn't she? Ivy finally looked at him. She's right. Sophie's getting attached. Too attached. And when this ends, who says it has to end? The question hung between them, dangerous and tender. I'm not, Ivy's voice cracked. I'm not the person your daughter should be attached to. I wake up screaming. I can't be in crowds without tracking exits. I'm broken, Damien. Your mother sees it. You should see it too. I do see it. He stepped closer. I see someone who's survived things that would have destroyed most people. Someone who still chooses to protect others despite knowing exactly how much it can cost. Someone who makes my daughter laugh. Someone who's brought life back into this house. I'm the help, Ivy whispered. Your mother made that very clear. My mother is terrified. Of what? Of me being happy again. Of Sophie having someone besides her. Of losing control over a family that's never really been hers to control. He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched Ivy's shoulder. Don't let her poison this. Don't let her make you doubt what you know is real. But the doubt was already there. Had been there for 6 weeks, buried under routines and dinners and Sophie's laughter. The doubt that said this couldn't last, that people like Ivy didn't get to keep good things. That happiness was always temporary, always borrowed, always on the verge of being ripped away. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, backpack on, Mr. Hopscotch in hand. Ready? She announced. Ivy pulled away from Damien's touch, forced a smile. Let's go, sweetheart. The drive to school was quiet. Sophie chattered about show and tell and finger painting, but Ivy barely heard her. Her mind was spinning with Victoria's words, inserted herself, playing house. What happens when she leaves? When, not if. Because people like Victoria Castellano didn't ask questions. They investigated. They dug. And Ivy knew exactly what they'd find. Honorable discharge, PTSD diagnosis. 3 soldiers dead under her command. A mission that went catastrophically wrong because she'd made the wrong call at the wrong moment. 5 years of psychiatric treatment, of medication, of nightmares that never really stopped. She was a liability, a risk, exactly the kind of person who shouldn't be near a 5-year-old child. Victoria would make sure Damien saw that, and maybe she'd be right to. That night, Sophie had a nightmare. Ivy was still awake at midnight, sitting on the small balcony of the garage apartment, when she heard the scream, high-pitched, terrified, the sound of a child in absolute distress. She was moving before conscious thought kicked in. Down the stairs, across the driveway, through the kitchen door she'd unlocked earlier, up the main staircase, taking steps 2 at a time. Sophie's room was the 3rd door on the left. Ivy burst through it just as another scream tore through the darkness. Sophie was tangled in her blankets, thrashing, crying. Mommy! Mommy, come back! Don't leave me! Ivy's training said, assess, evaluate, respond. Her body said, protect the child. But her trauma said, danger, threat, incoming. For one terrible second, all 3 imperatives collided. Ivy's vision tunneled, her pulse spiked. Her hands came up automatically in a defensive posture. And Sophie, still mostly asleep, still caught in her nightmare, stumbled out of bed toward the sound of Ivy's voice. Ivy reacted, pushed the small figure away, hard, protective instinct warped by flashback, by muscle memory that couldn't distinguish between a child and a threat in the dark. Sophie fell, Not far, not dangerously. But she hit her knee on the bedside table and let out a cry that was pure shock and pain. The sound snapped Ivy back to reality. She stared at Sophie, this little girl she'd sworn to protect, sitting on the floor crying, clutching her knee, looking up at Ivy with wide, confused eyes. "Ivy?" Sophie's voice was small, hurt. "Why did you push me?" Ivy's hands were shaking. "I didn't mean—" The light flicked on. Damien stood in the doorway in pajama pants and nothing else, his hair wild, his eyes taking in the scene in an instant. Sophie crying, Ivy standing frozen, the distance between them. "Sophie, sweetheart, what happened?" He was already moving, scooping his daughter into his arms, checking her knee. A small scrape, nothing serious. But the betrayal in Sophie's eyes was worse than any injury. "I had a bad dream, and Ivy came, but then she pushed me and I fell." Damien looked at Ivy. She couldn't meet his eyes. "It was an accident," she managed. I didn't realize—" But the words dried up. What could she say? That she'd mistaken his 5-year-old daughter for an enemy combatant? That her broken brain couldn't distinguish between a child's nightmare and a battlefield? That Victoria had been right all along? "I'm sorry," Ivy whispered. "I'm so sorry." She turned and walked out of the room, down the stairs, out of the house, back to the garage apartment where she began throwing things into her duffel bag with shaking hands. This was what she'd been afraid of, this moment. The proof that she was too damaged, too dangerous, too broken to be trusted with something precious. She'd hurt Sophie. Not badly, not permanently, but she'd hurt her. And next time, because there would be a next time, it might be worse. The knock on her door came 20 minutes later. "Ivy," Damien's voice. "Please open the door." "Go away. Not until we talk. There's nothing to talk about. I'm leaving. First thing in the morning." "No, you're not. I hurt your daughter." The words ripped out of her. "I pushed her, a 5-year-old child, because I had a flashback, because I'm exactly what your mother said I am. Unstable, dangerous." Silence. Then, "Sophie's asking for you." That stopped Ivy's packing. "What?" "She wants to say goodnight to you. She's worried you're mad at her." "Mad at her? I'm the one who—" "She thinks she scared you. That's why you pushed her away. She wants to apologize." Ivy sank onto the bed, duffel bag falling to the floor. "She wants to apologize? To me? Will you come talk to her? Please." Ivy didn't want to, wanted to finish packing, wanted to disappear before she could cause more damage. But Sophie was asking for her. Sophie, who'd trusted her, who'd called her family. Ivy walked back to the main house like she was heading to her own execution. Sophie was in Damien's bed, propped up against pillows, Mr. Hopscotch clutched tight. Her knee had a small bandage. Her eyes were red from crying. When she saw Ivy, she held out her arms. "I'm sorry I scared you," Sophie said. "Daddy explained that sometimes people who've been soldiers get scared when they wake up fast. Like how I get scared of thunderstorms even when I'm safe." Ivy's throat closed. She knelt beside the bed. "Sophie, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. I did. I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But you didn't mean to." Sophie's small hand reached out and touched Ivy's face. "Accidents aren't the same as being mean. Daddy says everybody makes mistakes. Even you. Some mistakes are too big. Not this one." Sophie leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Ivy's neck. "I forgive you. Will you stay? Please? I don't want you to go away like Mommy did." And that's when Ivy broke. She pulled Sophie close and let herself cry for the first time since Fallujah. Let this small, impossibly wise child hold her while she shook with 5 years of suppressed grief and guilt and fear. "I'm scared," Ivy whispered. "I'm scared I'll hurt you again." "Then Daddy and me will help you not be scared," Sophie said simply. "That's what families do." Over Sophie's shoulder, Ivy saw Damien watching from the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that looked like understanding, like acceptance, like something that might have been love if she let herself believe in it. "Stay," he said quietly. "Please." Ivy held Sophie tighter, felt the small, steady heartbeat against her chest, felt the weight of trust that this child was giving her despite every reason not to. She thought about running, about disappearing back into invisibility where she couldn't hurt anyone, But she also thought about morning coffee, about pancakes that were always slightly burnt, about Sophie's laughter and Damien's careful smiles, and the way this broken house had started to feel like home. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." But even as she said it, even as Sophie squealed with joy and Damien's shoulders dropped with relief, Ivy knew the truth. Victoria Castellano wasn't done. The investigation would continue. The past would be dragged into daylight, and when it was, Damien would have to make a choice. His mother's approval and Sophie's safety, or the damaged soldier who'd accidentally hurt his daughter. Ivy already knew which he'd choose. She just hoped she had the strength to leave before he had to make it. Victoria Castellano's investigator was thorough. The file arrived at Damien's office 3 days after the incident with Sophie. 47 pages. Every deployment, every commendation, every documented nightmare, every therapy session, every medication prescription. And buried on page 32, the mission report from Fallujah. Sergeant Ivy Brennan had led a 4-person tactical unit into a compound based on intelligence that later proved faulty. 3 soldiers died in the ambush that followed. Brennan survived with a shattered collarbone, 2 broken ribs, and psychological trauma severe enough to warrant medical discharge. The report cleared her of wrongdoing, called it unavoidable, tragic but not negligent. But Damien knew that official exoneration meant nothing to someone who'd watched their team die. He'd seen it in her eyes every time Sophie hugged her, every time she checked exits, every time she woke up screaming in the apartment above his garage. Ivy hadn't been cleared by the report that mattered most, the one she wrote about herself every single day. He was still reading when his office door opened without knocking. Victoria walked in, perfectly composed, carrying her own copy of the file. "Well," she said, "have you read it?" "I'm reading it now." "Then you see what I see. She's unstable, Damien. The PTSD, the medications, the night terrors, and she hurt Sophie. It was an accident. This time, what about next time? What about the time after that?" Victoria sat down across from him, her expression earnest, maternal. "I know you care about her, I can see it. But caring about someone doesn't make them safe to be around your daughter." Damien closed the file. Sophie forgave her. Sophie is 5 years old. She doesn't understand the complexities of trauma. She doesn't understand that people who are broken sometimes break others in the process of trying to hold themselves together. "Like I broke after Sophia died?" Victoria flinched. "That's different, is it? I was barely functional for 2 years. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't look at Sophie without seeing everything I'd lost. You didn't try to take her away from me then. You're her father. And Ivy is—" He stopped. What was Ivy? An employee? A friend? Something more? Something he'd been too afraid to name because naming it would make it real, and losing real things hurt more than losing convenient fictions? "She's what, Damien?" Victoria leaned forward. "Be honest with yourself. What is she to you?" He thought about morning coffee, about the way Ivy made Sophie laugh, about how she'd stepped between him and death without hesitation, about how she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, like she was memorizing him, like she expected to lose him. "She's someone I trust," he said finally. "Someone Sophie trusts. Someone who's brought light back into this house. Light that could go out at any moment if she has another episode. We all have episodes, Mother. We're all carrying damage. The question isn't whether we're broken. It's whether we're trying to heal. And Ivy is trying. Every single day." Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. "I've said my piece. What you do with it is your decision. But remember, you're not just making this choice for yourself. You're making it for Sophie. And if something happens, if Ivy's trauma causes real harm, you'll have to live with that." She left. Damien sat alone in his office, the file open in front of him, and thought about choices. About the choice Ivy made every morning to get out of bed despite the nightmares, to show up for Sophie despite being terrified of failing her, to stay when running would be so much easier. About the choice he was making right now. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Mrs. Rebecca Morse called again. "Wants to know if you're free for dinner this weekend?" Damien deleted the message. Then he picked up his phone and called Ivy. She answered on the first ring. "Is Sophie okay?" Always Sophie first, never herself. She's fine. She's at school. Can you meet me at the house? I need to talk to you. A long pause. Then, is this about the file? Your mother's investigation? How did you? I knew she'd do it. It's fine, Damien. I understand. I'll pack my things and be gone by tonight. Ivy? That's not... But she'd already hung up. Damien drove home faster than he should have, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pulled into the circular driveway just as Ivy was loading her duffel bag into the trunk of her Honda. She didn't look at him, just kept packing with mechanical efficiency, military precision, the way someone packed when they'd had to abandon positions quickly before. Ivy, don't. Her voice was flat, empty. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I'm not here to fire you. You should be. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were devastated, resolved. I read the file too. Your mother emailed me a copy. Very thorough, very damning. She's right, Damien. I'm a liability. I hurt your daughter. What if next time it's worse? What if you're exactly who we need? He stepped closer. What if you being broken is exactly what makes you perfect for this broken family? She shook her head. That's not how it works. You deserve someone whole, someone stable, someone who doesn't wake up screaming, someone your mother approves of. I don't give a damn about my mother's approval, but you should care about Sophie's safety. I do. That's why I'm asking you to stay. Ivy laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You're not making sense. Then let me be clear. Damien closed the distance between them until they were inches apart, until he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes, until he could smell the coffee and rain scent that Sophie loved. I've read the file, all 47 pages. I know about Fallujah. I know about the ambush. I know about the 3 soldiers who died under your command. She flinched as if he'd struck her. And I know, he continued softly, that you blame yourself every single day, that you think you don't deserve happiness, that you think being broken means you're dangerous. But here's what else I know. He reached out and took her hand. She tried to pull away, but he held firm. You stepped between me and 3 armed men without hesitation. You drive Sophie to school every day and remember to cut the crusts off her sandwiches. You learned all 17 stuffed animals' names in the first week. You make coffee at 6 a.m. even though you don't have to. You read Goodnight Moon in different voices even though Sophie has it memorized. You stay up until I get home from late meetings just to make sure I ate something. That's just love, Damien said. That's love, Ivy. Imperfect, terrified, broken love. The only kind that matters. The only kind that's real. Tears were streaming down her face now. I can't be what you need. What Sophie needs. I'm too damaged. You think I'm not damaged? I spent 2 years after Sophia died barely holding it together. I work 60-hour weeks to avoid my empty house. I can't walk into my own dining room without panic attacks. I'm terrified every single day that something will happen to Sophie and I'll lose her too. We're both disasters, Ivy. But we're disasters who keep showing up, who keep trying, who keep protecting the people we love even when we're terrified. We'll fail them. What if I hurt her again? Then we'll deal with it, together, because that's what families do. They don't abandon each other when things get hard. They hold on tighter. Ivy was sobbing now, full, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let people in. I don't know how to believe I deserve. Damien pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her while she fell apart. Neither do I, but I want to learn with you, if you'll let me. She clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to tear her away. And maybe he was. Maybe that's what they were for each other. Anchors in the storm. Your mother will never accept this. Ivy whispered against his shirt. My mother will learn too, or she'll lose her son and granddaughter. Her choice. The file tells me you're a survivor, a protector, someone who sacrifices herself for others. Exactly who I want protecting my daughter. Exactly who I want in my life. Ivy pulled back enough to look at him. Her face was blotchy and wet. Her eyes were red. She'd never looked more beautiful. I love you, Damien said. Not a question, not a plea, just a fact. I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love how you make Sophie laugh. I love how you leave the bathroom light on because the dark reminds you of Fallujah. I love that you check every room for exits. I love all of it. The broken parts, the scared parts, all of you. Damien, you don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel the same way. But you do have to stop running. You have to stay. Not because I'm asking you to, but because you want to. Because somewhere underneath all that fear and guilt, you know this is where you belong. For a long moment, Ivy just stared at him, and Damien watched something shift in her expression. Watched the walls she'd built so carefully start to crack, start to crumble. I'm terrified, she whispered. Good, so am I. We'll be terrified together. A small, watery laugh escaped her. That's the worst sales pitch I've ever heard. I'm a pharmaceutical executive, not a motivational speaker. He brushed tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. But I mean every word. Stay, Ivy. Please, let me take you home. Our home. There it was. The phrase. The one that mattered. Ivy closed her eyes, took a shaking breath, and when she opened them again, something had changed. Something had settled. Okay, she said. I'll stay. Damien kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. She kissed him back with 5 years of loneliness and fear and hope all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, Ivy was smiling, a real smile, the kind she'd forgotten she was capable of. We should pick up Sophie from school, she said. She'll want to know. She already knows. Damien pulled out his phone and showed Ivy the drawing Sophie had made that morning. 3 stick figures holding hands, labels underneath. Daddy, Sophie, Ivy Mom. Ivy's breath caught. Ivy Mom? She asked me this morning if it was okay to call you that. I said she should ask you first. But yes, if you're comfortable with it, if you want. I want. The words came out fierce, certain. God help me, I want everything. They picked Sophie up together, both of them, walking into the kindergarten classroom hand in hand, while Sophie's teacher raised her eyebrows, but said nothing. Sophie saw them and her entire face lit up. You stayed! She ran to Ivy, jumping into her arms with absolute trust. Daddy said you might change your mind, but I knew you wouldn't. I knew you loved us. Ivy held her tight, this small miracle of a child who'd seen right through every wall she'd built. I do love you so much, sweetheart. Does that mean you're staying forever? Ivy looked at Damien over Sophie's head. He was watching them with an expression so tender it hurt to see. Watching his daughter in the arms of the woman he loved. Watching his broken family become whole again. Yes, Ivy said. I'm staying forever. Sophie pulled back, grinning. Good, because we still need to get a dog. Mr. Hopscotch wants a friend. 3 months later, Victoria Castellano came to Sunday dinner. She came because Damien had made it clear, accept Ivy or lose access to Sophie. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, one he should have set years ago. Victoria arrived precisely on time, carrying flowers and wearing an expression that was carefully neutral. She kissed Sophie's cheek, nodded to Damien, and then turned to Ivy. Ms. Brennan, Mrs. Castellano. An awkward pause. Then Victoria held out the flowers. These are for you. Sophia used to love dahlias. I thought perhaps you might as well. It wasn't an apology. Not quite. But it was something. Ivy took the flowers. Thank you. They're beautiful. Dinner was tense, but civil. Victoria asked polite questions about Ivy's work, complimented the roast chicken, listened to Sophie chatter about her day, and watched. Always watched. Watched how Damien touched Ivy's shoulder when he passed behind her chair. How Ivy cut Sophie's chicken into small pieces without being asked. How the 3 of them moved around each other with the easy rhythm of people who'd built a life together. After dinner, Victoria asked to speak with Ivy privately. They stood on the back patio, the late summer air thick and warm. Victoria was silent for a long moment, staring out at the garden where Sophie was playing with their new golden retriever puppy. I was wrong about you, Victoria said finally. Not about the PTSD, not about the trauma. Those things are real. But I was wrong about what they mean. Ivy waited. I thought broken meant dangerous, but watching you with Sophie these past months, you're not dangerous. You're careful, vigilant. You see threats others miss. You protect her better than any security professional I could have hired. Victoria turned to face her. And you make my son happy. For the first time since Sophia died, he's alive again. That's because of you. It's because of Sophie, Ivy said quietly. She's easy to love. No, children are never easy. They're terrifying. They're fragile. They're walking reminders of everything we could lose. Victoria's voice softened. I lost my husband when Damien was 10. Heart attack. Sudden. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. I became obsessed with control, with preventing loss, with keeping everyone safe through sheer force of will. She looked at Ivy with something that might have been respect. But you can't control loss. You can only choose how you live, despite knowing it's coming. You choose to show up, to love people even though they might leave, to build families even though families break. That's not weakness, Ms. Brennan. That's courage. Ivy's throat tightened. I'm still scared. Every day. Good. Fear keeps us careful. It's only dangerous when it keeps us from living. Victoria held out her hand. Will you let me try again? To welcome you properly? Ivy took her hand. I'd like that. They stood together watching Sophie play, the puppy tumbling around her feet, her laughter carrying across the lawn. She calls you Mom, Victoria said. Sometimes, when she feels safe. And you? Do you feel safe? Ivy thought about it. About nightmares that still came but came less often now. About the medication she still took but in smaller doses. About the therapist Damien had helped her find who specialized in combat trauma. About mornings waking up in the main house, in Damien's bed, with sunlight streaming through windows and coffee brewing downstairs. I'm getting there, she said. One day at a time. Victoria nodded. That's all any of us can do. That night, after Sophie was asleep and Victoria had gone home, and the house was quiet, Ivy found Damien in the library, the room he'd avoided for 4 years. The room where he'd told Sophie her mother wasn't coming home. But tonight, he was sitting in the leather chair by the window, looking peaceful, almost content. Ivy sat on the arm of the chair. He pulled her into his lap. Your mother and I talked, she said. I know, she told me. Said you were surprisingly reasonable for someone so damaged. He smiled wryly. For my mother, that's high praise. She's trying. She is, because she knows I'll choose you. Every single time. Ivy leaned her head against his shoulder, felt his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. I never thought I'd have this. A home, a family, someone who sees all the broken pieces and stays anyway. The broken pieces are my favorite parts. He kissed the top of her head. They're what make you brave enough to keep trying. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from truly knowing someone, from seeing them at their worst and choosing them anyway. Damien? Thank you for not letting me run, for making me stay. He turned her face toward his, kissed her softly. Thank you for being brave enough to let me. Upstairs, Sophie slept peacefully, Mr. Hopscotch tucked under one arm and the puppy curled at her feet. On her nightstand, 17 stuffed animals stood guard, and on her wall, a new drawing, 4 stick figures now instead of 3. The golden retriever had joined the family. In the garage apartment that Ivy no longer used, her duffel bag sat empty in the closet. She didn't need it anymore. Didn't need an exit strategy. Didn't need to keep one foot out the door. She was home, and for the first time in 5 years, she believed she deserved to be. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're strangers who step out of cars in the rain, who choose courage over safety, who see past the walls we've built and decide we're worth the risk of knowing. Ivy Brennan thought she was too broken to protect anyone. Damien Castellano thought he was too damaged to love again. Sophie just knew that some people belong together, even when they don't believe it themselves. This story isn't about perfect people finding each other. It's about fractured souls, learning that healing doesn't mean being unbroken. It means being brave enough to let someone see the cracks and stay anyway. It's about the Uber driver who became a guardian, the CEO who learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, the little girl who understood that family isn't about bloodlines or perfection. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. We all carry damage. We all have nights when the darkness feels too heavy. We all have moments when we're certain we don't deserve the good things that find us. But stories like Ivy and Damien's remind us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to stay, despite it. That love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to grow alongside your imperfections. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop running and let ourselves be seen. If this story touched you, if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness no matter what they've survived, don't forget to like and subscribe. We share stories about real people facing real struggles and finding unexpected grace, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Thank you for being part of our Soul Thread Stories family. Your presence here matters. Until next time, remember, the people who seem most broken are often the ones with the most courage to give.